Well, what is going on, everyone? Welcome back once again to the VoV Network, where great things are always happening. I'm Brian Murray, and I'm here with Bridget Kinney, and we're going to get into a very interesting topic today, and that is talking about mental bandwidth. And I know many of you probably saw that title and went, "What the heck is that?" Right? So that's what we're going to start with. Bridget, how are you doing today?
I am doing great. I am doing great. I'm excited about this topic.
Awesome. Well, we're going to dive right in. So I'm going to bring in an explanation because that's probably one of the biggest questions I think most people have when they saw mental bandwidth and, what's your frequency? What the heck are we talking about? Right. So, simply put, mental and emotional bandwidth is about a person's capacity to be able to take in process information, and then respond to their environment. Again, I read that and most people could probably go, okay, that helps a little bit. But I want to focus in on a couple of keywords here, and that's why I put them in bold. One is take in. So basically, it is your capacity to take in new information from a mental or emotional standpoint. Process. So processing is also, I think, the most important piece of this because you've taken in the new information, whatever it might be, now you have to be able to process your way through it. And the question is, how much can you manage? How much can you process through before you start to kind of get a little bit out of tune with yourself and your environment and the people around you? And the last piece is to respond because you can't really respond to the stimulus that's come in until you've had an opportunity to process your way completely through it. So those are the three things to keep in mind out of that statement is taking it in, processing your way through it, and then being able to respond. So what I did is I have a chart. I put a chart together that kind of explains this in a little bit more detail so you can understand what we're talking about here. Think of it as a funnel, right? So you've got a funnel, which obviously has a much wider top. And into that funnel on a daily basis, week after week, month after month, you're having lots of new stimulus and information put into the top of that funnel, whether it's mental input or emotional input. That actually has to obviously get narrowed down in the funnel as it shows here. And that gets to this point where you have kind of a point of feeling overwhelmed. And that's really what we're going to focus in today is giving you some insight and some information on better ways to be able to manage that point where it gets squeezed and maybe you start to feel overwhelmed. A, how to better identify it. And then B, we're going to get into some ways to be able to better manage that point. So at the bottom, one of two things happen. Either your actual capacity increases, or maybe it's a requirement that you narrow the top of the funnel. So the gap between what goes in and what you can actually process through is narrower. So, Bridget, how about you give us a little bit of background on why we came up with this and why we think it's an important subject to talk about?
And as we discussed before, what is going on right now with the pandemic, how people are adjusting to the new workspace, how kids are adjusting to either being virtual and then going back into the schools, how businesses are adjusting to like lack of employees or not being able to fit those needs into their budget in terms of the amount of employees that they had in the past. We're all going through some type of mental health issues that are not necessarily diagnosed, right? And so your mental bandwidth, like the capacity to hold all this information, all these situations that's going on in your life, I mean, it can get overwhelming. And so that's where we came up with the mental bandwidth and how you can gauge that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you're so right. There's obviously the last couple of years have been a struggle and a change for all of us in many different ways, whether it's personal life, your career, or whatever else is going on in your life. And then now coming out of it, even though we are quote unquote starting to get back to what they're going
What
to
they
call the
say,
new normal,
and yeah, another normal.
another normal, you look at it and you go, I'm still struggling to, kind of stand up on my feet and really figure out how I navigate my way through this other normal, as you put it. So,
Yes, and I say another normal because some people are still using that the other way of doing things during pandemic, and they're trying to integrate the new normal and with another new normal, and going back out into the community, going into work, and versus staying at home. Some of them are still trying to integrate both of those normals together. So it's just another new normal.
So what we're going to do is we're going to dive a little bit further into this. Before we do, we're going to say a couple of things. My name is Brian Murray. I am the founder of the VoV Network, and got a co-partner here today, and that's Bridget Kinney from she's Building Bridges Outreach. And we're going to be doing a series actually on this moving forward. So this is part one for this particular topic. And then we have some other great things also planned. Bridget, anything else you want to add on top of that to let them know?
You've already introduced me. I am Bridget Kenny. I am the founder and director of Building Bridges Mentor and Outreach Program, and also Beautiful Girls. And I am excited about this collaboration.
Awesome. Well, let's move on to the next slide. So I'm going to bring that in right now. And this is really getting into something Bridget's going to cover for us. And is, first of all, identifying where you are on this scale. And we use the term frequency, high or low. What can you manage? So that's the first thing we're going to kind of dive into is some ways to be able to determine, do you have a strong mental bandwidth or are you on the scale right now? So Bridget, you want to cover that for us?
I will. And just as a disclaimer, this is an interactive podcast. So please comment, chime in, thumbs up, like, love. Anything that we say or we discuss that resonates with your situation is at this particular time. So this is not a presentation. This is an interactive engagement. So I'm going to go right into number one. Do you accept and understand your weaknesses and know how to seek help? I know that in the past, in years past, we as an African American culture, especially, have been, conditioned that seeking counseling meant that you were diagnosed with a type of mental illness, right? And so, but fast forward, it is so important that we protect and even restore our mental health by utilizing therapy, counseling, and support groups. We sometimes need more than just our immediate circle.
Agreed. I could not agree with that more, and uh, it's not only seeking the help, but I think I underlined something on this slide when I was looking at it. Know how to seek help, because that's the other piece of the pie. Sometimes you get to that point where you may want to get some help, but then how do you go about doing that? So that's the other half of the puzzle. Where can you go? Who can you contact? So that you feel comfortable in that process. So that may be something that you want to actually take the time. If you do feel like, hey, maybe I need to talk to someone, uh, find out what your resources are and investigate a few so that it's something that you feel comfortable doing.
And just like what you said with your resources, because of the pandemic, and if you want to look at a positive side of this, there are so many mental health resources now just because of the pandemic. And so it's not really far to find. You can your local, your community resource numbers in your community, go into your state community resources and find out affordable prices as well, affordable care as well, how you can get to those resources. And don't be afraid, because we're all in some way needing that therapy, that counseling, those support groups to band with us and strengthen our mental health.
Could not agree more. Could not agree more.
Number two, do you value time spent alone, and do you use that time to reflect and regroup? I know with me, and I'm sure Brian can attest to that as well. Living full lives like most of us do gives us very little alone time. So we not only, I mean, that's even in your household, right? In your family, in your house. So we not only have to be very intentional about our alone time, but also assign that alone time. Assign it to reflect, restore, and refresh. Assign that to an activity, a mental health break, so to speak. And so we have to be very intentional about assigning that to something, not just saying, okay, so I'm just going to be alone and I'm just going to have this in my room and I'm just going to chill. And then what happens? Those wheels start turning. Then we start thinking, okay, well, I forgot to do. Oh, I need to do. So assign that a time alone to something, and then occupy your time alone with that activity.
Yep, for sure. And I'm naturally a person who really needs that alone time to recharge. So it's very important for me that I get that and regroup, reflect, and move forward from that. So I totally appreciate that.
Absolutely. And if you have to comment what your alone time assignment looks like for you. What would
Mhm.
it look like for you? What you would like it to look like for you? Number three, do you recognize the efforts of others? You know, what they deposit into your life and show them gratitude. And I know some people may keep this gratitude journal just to say what they're thankful for, but I really believe that recognizing others and what they pour into our lives, how they show up to support us, is also being aware of how much we don't have to bear or do on our own. We don't have to do it all, right? And it alleviates the pressure that we sometimes build trying to do it, ourselves. Who can agree with that? Who can agree that we sometimes build that pressure ourselves by thinking that we need to do this on our own? So when we recognize the efforts of others, we recognize what people deposit into our lives, how we build a support circle, then
Mhm.
we also alleviate the pressure that we have to do this by ourselves.
Yes, indeed. I want to kind of tell a little bit of a story associated with that because this is a key point for me that I want to bring in here. So I look at this and you talk about from the standpoint of deposit into your life, right? But I also see that there's a balance that has to happen here. So because yes, we're talking about this from the standpoint of what is your mental bandwidth, but understand that you're also interacting with other people that are important to you in your life. They also have some limits when you talk about mental bandwidth. So when I talk about balance, what I'm saying here from a deposit standpoint, there are deposits that you're taking in, but there are also withdrawals that you're taking from other people, right? So you have to look at that and understand
Yes.
that you have to try to strike a balance with that.
Mhm.
If you're withdrawing from someone else, you also need to be taking some time to make some deposits with that person, showing some appreciation, showing some gratitude, letting them know that how much you value them, so that everything that you're taking from them is not
Mm,
just a withdrawal. You're actually depositing. It's like a bank account. You
right.
have it overdrawn if all you're doing is taking, 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 but not putting anything into it. So also keep that in your mind with this particular part of it, that it is you are thinking of this as a way of striking a balance so that you make almost, if not equal to, the number of deposits as you do with the withdrawals that you're taking out.
Right. And if you look at it, you're building a positive, continue to build a positive support system, right? Because you all are both redrawing and withdrawing and then replenishing that. So you're building a stronger um circle in that. And you need that strong circle to strengthen your mental bandwidth. I see Mabel said that true or alone time is important for yourself. It is very important that you spend that time alone, and also that you assign that time to a reflect or restore or replenish activity so that you can get the benefit from that.
Mhm.
And I also think that when you embrace others, you show up for yourself as I mean for them, and they show up for you, and then you get some relief, right? You get some relief in that, and you won't have to go at this thing alone, because I think that's a big point in our weakening our mental bandwidth, is that we feel like we have to do this all on our own, and we have to do it ourselves.
It's so true. Absolutely true on that. So let's move on to the next slide. We'll go ahead and get that going. And then, all of these things are important, right? That we stay focused to. And, we're going to go on to the next couple of bullet points here. This one, number 4, says, do you realize that the power of no isn't selfish? And that's a huge one. And I'm going to come back and talk a little bit about that. And also, have you learned how to eliminate the need to please others? So, as Bridget was just saying a little while ago, our world has just totally shifted over the last few years with the pandemic and other things. So we've kind of shifted into this mode of, trying to not step on everybody's toes because everybody's a little bit more sensitized, this, that, and the other thing. We're coming out of that now. And what you do have to realize is that the power of no is a very important thing. The ability for you to say no, not to take on more than you can truly manage or handle. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's not selfish, it's more of a self care thing. And that's why we wanted to bring it up from a mental bandwidth standpoint, because if you do see as we go through this, maybe you are starting to have some struggles and some challenges with all of the mental and emotional things that are being expected of you, then it may be time for you to just say, you know what? I can't take that on right now. And it's not to say that maybe at a later point in time, it may be something you can reconsider, but you have to be able to stand up for self and not feel guilty, not feel like it's a selfish thing, and be able to say no and be comfortable with that.
And I was saying this is kind of comical, but I'm going to go ahead and say this. There's a song that's titled "No Is Bay." Now, Bay, Bay shows up in your life to give you comfort, right? It gives you peace. Bay make sure you're good, right? Well, no does the same thing.
Yeah.
Don't you agree? And I believe the need to please, or as I call it sometimes, yes to the mess. It often comes
That's good.
it often comes from a place of like insecurity or just not being self-aware.
Mhm.
And I've been guilty of it. How many of you have been guilty of it? And that has weakened, my mental bandwidth. Just
Mhm.
not knowing how to say no because I don't how are they going to feel, what are they going to say, and how are they going to look at me? And those are some questions that mentally I've said, not without asking that in the exact words, but just asking that. I see Allison says saying no is a huge problem for me. Since childhood, it has always been a part of my makeup. Is to please others is like a bad habit, and it definitely is. It takes some work to do that. But just think of Noah as Bay. Like, it makes you feel good. And just try it. Sometimes you'll say, no, I can't do that. And you go back and say, you know what? That felt kind of good.
Well, I want to add one more thing on top of that because I used to struggle years ago with saying no because it was, again, as she was just saying, Allison was saying, trying to please and wanting to not disappoint other people. And then as I moved on, matured, got through my career a little bit more, I actually became very good at saying no. However, one of the ways that I do it, and people out there, please, you can absolutely use this, is I'm very easy for me to go, no, I cannot do that. But then I always follow that with, however, this is what I can do, right? So it's not that I'm slamming the door in your face 100%. Most times, sometimes I do have to say a complete no, but I would say most of the time I can actually say, however, I can commit to doing X or Y or this piece or that piece, knowing what I can and cannot manage. And that goes back to what Bridget was just saying a few moments ago about the self awareness piece. And that's really why we're even doing this today, is just to help you become more self aware of maybe where you're having these sticking points so that you can better deal and manage with them. But that's the key for me. And that's really how I manage saying no a lot of the times is, no, I can't do that. However, I can do this, or that for you. And that kind of puts it into a middle ground where I feel okay, like I am helping and still contributing, and they still feel like they're valued and what they need is also being taken care of.
Now, mind you, he has said, as his career had progressed and he had got a little bit more mentally stronger. Now, I will say for those that have not been able to, just get to that level, and no, and I agree with him totally. But at first, no, because what happens is there's a fine line when you cross. But however, and then you may find yourself compromising the however with
Mhm.
that person, especially if it's someone very close to you and they are used to you saying yes. And then you say, yes, however, I can do this, this, and this. And then they go, well, what about if you do this, this, and this? So now you're making another decision. So
Mhm.
like you said, he used to be that way until he got more stronger in his mental bandwidth and in his career further along. So if you have a problem with no right now, I would say just say no. And then once you're stronger in that and okay, I can give these options to him or to her. So, and I can follow through with that. And no, I'm not gonna compromise what I said. This is what I can do. Then I would do that. Thank
Yeah.
you for your comments.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. The comments are great. And Bridget, it's interesting because there is kind of this negotiation piece that happens, as you said. You say, however, and then I say, well, what about this and what about that?
Mm-hmm,
But
mm-hmm.
then that's where you do have to really get comfortable with self and know what your true limitations are and be able to
Yes.
stand firm on those when you need to.
Because you will find yourself compromising and then you'll hang up the phone or walk away from that conversation and you go, well, I'm as stressed out as I was before I decided
Right.
what I was gonna say. Now I'm
Amen.
doing this instead
Right.
of this.
Right.
So, like I say, no, it's bad. and keep that. If you can remember that, keep that, because it will, if you don't use those steps, as he and I said, it will weaken your mental bandwidth.
Yes, it will. All right, let's move on to number five. Number five, and I'm going to hold my hand up even before I read it and say guilty as charged. Uh, do you conform to a perfectionist line of thinking? And that is another thing that's baked into me most of my life is I'll get a hold of something and I will not put it down or let it go until in my mind it's perfect. And that can be a challenge. Um, and also, do you lean into progress instead of perfection? Right. So that's a interesting thing because a lot of the times I get caught up and it has to be perfect before I'll let it go versus just appreciating that I am making progress and not getting so hooked on the perfectionist piece of it. So it's a personal struggle that I deal with every day.
Yes.
So this and that's part of what we're doing today is I is far from perfect, and Bridget, I'm sure you can attest that we some of these things we read and went, "Ooh, yeah, that's me," right? Because we're
Mm-hmm.
not saying that we don't do these things or we don't have these issues, because we absolutely do. I want to share a quote with you that relates to this, and this is actually a quote from Denzel Washington talking about the piece about progress versus perfection, and he said, "Don't confuse movement with progress." And basically, what he was saying with that is appreciate the fact that you have to have discipline and consistency to actually reach completion. So take and appreciate the fact that you're taking the time, you're being disciplined, you're being consistent, you're working your way through towards the completion of whatever it is. So that may be the perfectionist piece of it, the actual completion part, but appreciate that you are taking the steps one at a time, whatever it might be. As they say, how do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time, right? You can't just eat the whole elephant when you start. So that's what I have done to try to help myself not get so hooked on being perfect or the perfectionist piece of me is to really appreciate, hey, I am taking the steps, I am breaking this down, and I'm working my way through it, and that's my reward versus the actual completed piece, because you're going to get there as long as you keep taking those steps. So that's a great quote by him. But just don't get it confused. Just because you're having movement, don't let that make make it feel like it's progress, because it's all part of the entire thing that needs to happen for you.
Right. It's like the journey, right? It's like
Yeah.
the journey to perfection. And just kind of enjoying the view of that journey, because you have to be disciplined. You have to set your goals. I read a quote and I like it because of my personality. And so this stuck out, these two quotes stuck out for me. It said, perfection hampers success. It often opens the door to anxiety, depression, addiction, and life paralysis. And I also read a quote that said, perfection is boring. Getting better is where all the fun is.
Hmm.
And that's the journey. I myself, I've never had a problem with trying to be perfect, because I learned a long time ago that it failed me every time. And so now I just enjoy the journey toward perfection, which is progress. And I take that in a little bit at a time. So basically, both of those quotes are saying to attempt to be perfect stunts your mental and emotional growth.
Hmm. Very
It
true.
prevents you from growing. I like continue. You said progress over perfect. Wow, I struggle here. And so the thing we need to think of is, what are the steps that we're taking to get to that perfection? What are the steps that we're taking? Because that's the real meat, right? Of it, the steps that we're taking to get to perfection, and that's your progress, and that's what you focus on. Those steps,
Hmm.
those steps.
No, it absolutely is. Focus on the steps. That because that's going to get you to your target because you just keep taking the steps, right? So you will reach completion as long as you keep focusing on the steps. And again, as I said, the discipline and the consistency, those are the key things that you need.
And perfection is like we've arrived, right?
Hmm.
And who has really arrived? Because every time we get to that step, we want to learn more, we want to do more, we want to complete, we have more goals. So no one really arrives. So dismiss the idea of perfection and just go, dive into the deeper into progress and what that looks like. And so come in, let us know what that would look like for you.
Yeah. Great, great, great information. So that's going to wrap up. We've shared now some of the things that you can ask yourself and questions, to kind of process through just from a self awareness standpoint, mainly. Um, how strong are you from a mental bandwidth standpoint? Where do you see the challenges? Is it the perfectionist piece? Is it the saying no piece? And all those various things that we've talked about so far. Now we're going to flip the page and we're going to go to the other side of the coin where we're going to ask, kind of answer some of the things as to, all right, now we've identified where we need help. What can I do to start to remedy some of those things?